Please give a very warm welcome to Jeff Siegel.
Thank you. Very nice to be back here. I was here last, I don't know when you guys had it last year, but it was about 1 million degrees here, so it's kind of nice to be back and not melt. Like I said, my name is Jeff Siegel. I run an investment newsletter called Green Chip Stocks. I started in 2006, and the idea was to help people invest in socially responsible investment opportunities. And primarily at the time, we started with things like renewable energy and organic food. And about 4 years ago, we got into the cannabis space. For me, it was more of a personal thing, as I really do believe that by investing in cannabis, we are it is a socially responsible endeavor. The idea that we can invest in something that can help end the war on drugs, invest in something that can help sick people get the medicine they need. So it is a very honorable endeavor, and I do take it very seriously, which is why I speak at investment conferences all over the world, as well as cannabis conferences, because I think that this is something that really needs to be democratized more, and more of us, especially people that are very passionate about the movement, can invest and make some money as well. So I brought a couple people with me here today, two of my colleagues, Jimmy Mengel and Britt Ryle. I will let them introduce themselves very quickly, but I can tell you that these two guys are very successful investors and have made a lot of money, not just in the cannabis space, but just as investors in a number of different sectors. So Jimmy, you can go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, my name is Jimmy. I run a newsletter called the Marijuana Manifesto that is exclusively dedicated to cannabis. I've been in the space for about 4 to 5 years now, and it's amazing to see how it's grown so far. And I'm happy to share some insights with you about what to avoid and how to, really pick out a legitimate cannabis company you actually want to sink your money into.
Thanks, Jimmy. Britt?
My turn. My name is Britt Ryle, and I run a newsletter called Wealth Advisory. We focus very much on long-term investments, dividend investments, compounding your wealth and that sort of thing. I want to make one point at the outset that for me personally, and for Jimmy I think too, we're talking about public companies that have stock that you can buy, right? I know Jeff has some insights about investing in private companies, private placements, and that kind of thing for people with the funds to do that sort of thing. But for myself, I'm going to be talking about public companies and ways that you can simply buy stock to get yourself exposure to some cannabis companies that seem like they have some wealth building potential for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett. Brett, you're actually known in investment circles as the kind of guy that takes on what we call safe investments. You don't take on a lot of risk. Typically invest in larger companies. And you've been very successful in that. But the cannabis space is still very young. So how does a guy like you get into cannabis, which is where the risk is still quite high?
Well, I mean, it clearly has potential to be a good market. I mean, we all know that there's a lot of people that enjoy their weed out there. I mean, I certainly have as a younger man. Maybe, well, never mind. But I mean, you guys know the numbers, right? They're talking about a $50 billion market at some point. There's going to be a lot of money to be made. There's a lot of money to be made right now. Plenty of companies are doing very well. For me personally, when I see those numbers, I mean, I can imagine a market that's similar to like your beer and alcohol market. I mean, it's a consumer product that we're looking at emerging onto the scene. So to me, immediate risk is definitely there. There's not that many ways to invest publicly these days for my personal risk preference, but I see huge potential for it. So I'm watching the market develop. I think there's a few things to do now, and I really want to see how it establishes itself over time. It seems to me with a market this large, right now you're not hearing a lot about it. Maybe last week, Constellation Brands, who makes Corona, made a big investment in Canopy, a couple $100 million. That's been one of the very first big companies starting to enter into this space. There's going to be more of this. I mean, I can't tell you that Philip Morris is going to enter it, but as a $50 billion market for an emerging consumer product, you're going to have big companies moving in. I guarantee they're looking at it. I guarantee you Jeff Bezos at Amazon is looking at how he's going to get into this market. And that's going to be the way that I approach cannabis investing, is through the bigger companies, stable stocks, pay dividends that have are going to have a long-term exposure to it and the ability to really enter it, market it, and distribute it. Because it's going to be companies that already have big distribution channels, like a Constellation Brands, for instance. I mean, they're worldwide. They're selling Corona all over the world. If they go to, have a cannabis-infused beer, they're going to have a leg up on smaller companies just because of the distribution channels they have, the connections they already have, just kind of like the marketing weight of a company like that. So that's really what I'm looking at, and then I'll have some suggestions for, ways to look at that now that seem to be pretty viable for playing out.
If I could just, I know Jimmy wants to comment on this too. Just so you know, also, he's talking about some of these bigger companies getting in. There's a lot of companies, these bigger companies that are technically in the space already and you don't know about it. And to give you an example, there is a Colombian producer called Farmacielo, which is the first company in Colombia to get a license to grow and sell. There are 2 people on the board of directors of that company that are former big tobacco guys. There is another Canadian company that is a grower, and they have people in management, high-level C-suite management, that are former big pharma guys. So a lot of people don't realize this, but they're in there already, and they're waiting, and they're going to pounce. So I agree with what Britt is saying, and I just want to kind of add to that it is happening right now. And Jim, I know you wanted to comment on that too.
Yeah, Britt brought up Constellation dumping about $200 million into Canopy Growth. So the first thing I did when I started investing in cannabis is I drove to Ontario, Canada to visit the Canopy facilities. And it just goes to show you how far it's come since then. When I went there, they grow marijuana in an old Hershey chocolate factory. And when I went to meet the CEO, it said Mr. Wonka on his door. And it was like all kind of like, oh, this is cute, like maybe this is gonna work out. But after touring the facility and seeing how serious their operation was, I told my readers, I was like, we gotta get into this company, this is really gonna be huge. And I think I recommended it around $1.80, and it's now what, almost $20.
It cost $20 last week, actually, but it's back down to about 19, I think. And just so you know, Canopy Growth Corporation is it's a Canadian company, trades on the Toronto Stock Exchange. It is the largest Canadian cannabis company, and they are also distributing outside of Canada into Germany, Australia, and into South America. And I think all 3 of us on stage would probably agree that Canopy Growth Corporation is, if you have a portfolio with cannabis stocks, it is probably the bedrock of that portfolio.
Yeah, and it was interesting to see because obviously that's a ton of money that was made in what was a niche industry. When you see a large alcohol company like Constellation going to do this, just that announcement itself shot the stock up, 40, 50% in a week.
It was like 60.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. So you're going to continue to see other companies, as Jeff was saying, start investing in this, and it really legitimizes the entire industry. So it's not a bunch of pump and dump penny stocks where people are just putting weed in their company name. These are legitimate industries that have, billion-dollar valuation.
And we started out, all 3 of us started out investing in these companies when they were still penny stocks. Probably more so Jimmy and I, because I know Britt doesn't take on a lot of risk. But I mean, Jimmy, he's worked with a lot of different companies, not just in the cannabis space. And I'm actually not sure you've made a lot of money in other spaces. Did you get into the cannabis space for the same reason, because you saw the possibility of how big it would be, or do you have like a personal? Because I know for me, it was kind of personal. For years I really feel like I've been fighting a good fight against the war on drugs, and so it was personal for me. How did you approach it?
Well, I heard they were opening up a massive marijuana factory in an old chocolate factory, and I was like, work's gonna pay for me to go there. I'm at least gonna go check it out. But I saw the writing on the wall when Canada really started opening up the market. And I know, I mean, just reading polls over the last 10 years, it's just been a rapid acceptance of marijuana as just a quality product that should really not be illegal whatsoever. And it was a pretty simple thing to see. So after touring the facility and seeing the operations and understanding that people were serious, it's not a bunch of guys in their basement, selling weed. It's a factory.
And that was in Canada, and I think that's something we have to really stress here is a lot of the stocks that we all invest in the cannabis space are Canadian. The Canadians will have full-scale legalization in July, and there's not as much risk if you invest in Canada as opposed to the U.S. I mean, you got to look at it like this. Okay, in Canada, they don't have this psychotic little devil attorney general running around telling everybody that they're bad if they smoke weed. So there's a significant risk if you do invest in the U.S. As opposed to Canada. That's my opinion on that. I mean, I think there's still some opportunities in the U.S. for sure, but you are. I think sometimes the risk can be overblown. I think we're kind of at this point now where it's going to happen, and it's going to go probably the way gay marriage went, state by state till it fell. And the same thing will happen with cannabis. What are your thoughts, Britt? I mean, I know that you not just in the cannabis space, but invest in other spaces in the U.S. What are your thoughts about the U.S.?
Well, I think that in terms of it proliferating in the United States, I think we're definitely watching Canada as a test case, right? They vote July 1st, 2018 to legalize it across the country for recreational use, which is a big step because that opens the consumer product market, just where you can have it as you would a beer or a bottle of wine. It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. Canopy, for instance, is really sort of fulfilling the medical marijuana market at the time. Is that right?
That's how that was the only way they could do it until this legalization.
Right. So yeah, I mean, and that's been an excellent space to be in. I think that ultimately the consumer side of it is going to end up being much bigger than the medical marijuana side, and that's sort of what I'm waiting for to play out, because you really have like two markets that are emerging. We're getting in on the medical marijuana now, and it will sort of transition into a consumer market in time. I'm not exactly sure when that will happen for the United States, which is one of the things that I'm kind of watching now. You have in the United States, $7 billion in revenue for the medical marijuana market right now, roughly doubling over the next close to 10 years to $14 billion in medical marijuana sales. So then if you're looking at a market that's going to potentially be a $50 billion market, the majority of that's going to be made up from the consumer sales. And I think there's a lot of questions about how that's actually going to play out, which is why Constellation's taking a sort of a token position. I mean, Constellation's a pretty big company. Take a token position now and see how it plays out so you're ready when it happens. There's all kinds of questions. How's it going to be taxed? How's it going to be distributed? I know Canada is still hammering out some of these questions right now. They're not sure if they're going to be sort of government-controlled stores that sell marijuana, or if it's going to be privately licensed stores. I'm from Virginia. I grew up there. We have ADC stores, right? All your liquor you have to buy at a state-run store. They close at 7. If you missed it, you missed it. You go to West Virginia, you can buy Jack Daniels in a 7-Eleven. We're very much state by state. Well, it's ridiculous. Yeah, it's ridiculous. But you're going to have to hammer out all of these kinds of issues before you really get to that the meat of that consumer market. So I'm fascinated to watch how Canada approaches this. I mean, you've got the Canadian police chief is already just like, or Canadian police chief. I don't think there's one for all of Canada, but they're they're trying to get the vote postponed already because they don't know what to do. They don't know how to handle it. I think Trudeau is absolutely right to just forge ahead, blast it open, and sort of manage it as it comes. It's the way to go. But I guarantee you that the big U.S. corporations are just watching this and trying to see what happens. They want to see it. Canada is totally our test case, and this is really going to decide how it plays out in this country. And it's coming fast. That vote in July and how it plays out is going to be really, really interesting.
Well, and speaking of the alcohol and marijuana connection, once legalization hits in Canada, marijuana will be a bigger market than beer. And Canadians drink a lot of beer, from my experience.
Yeah.
And that's, you can't argue with trends like this. So getting exposure, like in your investments, if you're interested in, making a lot of money on a incontrovertible trend, I would highly recommend doing so.
Okay, so let's just get to the meat and potatoes then. What do you invest in?
Meat and potatoes.
Yeah. Give me some names.
One other thing about the before I get into names, and this is just coming from my personal risk tolerance, which is probably maybe a little less than or a little more than others. In addition to sort of looking at the market between the consumer market and the medical marijuana market, I'm also looking at the commodity of marijuana itself versus the finished product that people will end up buying as consumers. It seems to me that the amount of investment that's going into the growing right now means that you're most likely to see virtually more pot grown than we can even consume. I would think so. I would think that prices are going to get lower, like they're going to go down. It's going to get cheaper. So I'm very much focused on, and again, this is sort of a timing thing. I wasn't dealing with any of the early startups. I mean, Canopy is a fantastic company. They've done and will do very well. I'm a little leery of investing in growers myself in terms of public companies because I feel like their product isn't going to have pricing power. It's going to be finished products, edibles, infused beers, coffees, like whatever it might be. I mean, why aren't we going to have a Starbucks weed latte at some point? I mean, you almost certainly will, right? Like you almost certainly will. And they'll sell a lot of, maybe it won't be Starbucks, maybe it'll be somebody else. But, they've already got the customers, they've already got the stores. It's not going to be a big leap for them to move into other spaces. And so, I'm messing around trying to figure out who's going to have the leg up when it happens. There's a little bit of a time lag here before that happens. I also think that some of the companies that are working in a pharmaceutical space to develop cannabis-based drugs, cannabinoids, are going to probably have a leg up because again, they can sort of patent their drugs that they get. They're going to be able to protect themselves from being commoditized and being competed with from other companies. So, Jeff, meat and potatoes.
Just give me the name.
Yeah, here they come.
I got some names.
You got names.
Want me to give you my names? You want to give
Sure.
your
You
names?
want to? Yeah, you can go. Go, Jimmy.
So, for example, I completely agree. You honestly have to have a very special product, just like branding anything else. So let's just take the medical example. I don't know if many of you are medical marijuana users. I wouldn't imagine, but say you need your medicine and you're at work. So what do you have to sneak down to the parking lot and just vape in your car like 4 times a day to manage your chronic pain, for instance? That's not a very good way to medicate. Like it's complicated. So there's a company called Emblem Corporation that is out of Canada as well. So for example, they just patented, or they are going through the patent process of a time-released cannabinoid that you take, and like any other pill you would take, throughout the day, it releases like medication should. So when you actually need products like that where you're not sneaking out to your car to get your medicine, like that is a huge product that has serious potential. And if they got a patent on a product like that, like the possibilities are endless for rolling that out to the rest of the world as more medical markets open up. And I'm sure you're familiar with all of the ailments that medical marijuana has continued to prove to aid or alleviate, chronic pain or anxiety, even MS spasticity, epilepsy.
The thing to add about Emblem too is when I was talking before about some of these other bigger companies having exposure to the cannabis space. Emblem is a company that there are people in management positions at that company that are former big pharma guys. They have a lot of money. And that's one thing that we really look at, all three of us, we look at some of these companies, is it's getting really, really competitive. So they really have to have a war chest of capital to take them through the next couple of years. So Emblem is a company that's a great product, connection to the big pharmaceutical industry, and lots of money. So yeah.
And picking up on that, it's not just a random CEO of a pharma company. This was a big pharma company that spearheaded OxyContin. And even in talking to their management, I think I could sense some guilt in their heads about what they had done with the OxyContin market and how that has been a serious, epidemic in the United States.
If they're that guilty, they can donate their money to opioid research.
Well, I'm not absolving them of anything. I'm just saying, like, they were into the pain market and understand that the potential for something safer and better is there. And as a big pharma company goes, if they can deliver on that with everything that's going on with opioids, I think that's, again, a socially responsible thing to do and will make them a ton of money. So if that's an example of a specialized product. It's not just somebody selling flour. It's a patentable material that can be scaled out across the world. So I try to look for companies like that can, really up the game and just provide something unique. And Emblem's good. And if you guys are investors, they trade on the Vancouver Stock Exchange under ENC.
What about you, Brett?
Speaking of the pain aspect of
oh my God,
cannabinoid, you're in pain. It's going to be worse. There's a company called Arena Pharmaceuticals. It's a small pharma company in the United States, about a $2 billion company at this point. Shares trade around $26, $25, and they have a cannabinoid compound that gets into some inhibitor in your brain that helps to block pain. I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on TV. Didn't sleep in a Holiday Inn last night, but they're getting some fairly promising results. They're just getting some FDA approval to test this drug. It will initially go to treat Crohn's disease and related pain. Compound is APD 371. And at this point in time, 1 in 8 Crohn's patients gets prescribed opioids. This compound would certainly aid that. Overall, 100 million Americans suffer chronic pain. It's a $30 billion market right now. If some cannabis-based drugs can alleviate that pain, be proven to alleviate it, we know what the side effects are going to be. You might get a little hungry. It could be a really big opportunity, and this is a company that's, kind of one of the earlier ones, working to sort of offset, the chronic pain that people feel and the opioid addiction that we have going on in this country with a cannabis-based solution. And I think it's one to pay attention to. ARNA. They have brought a drug to market before, so they're not completely inexperienced. They've got some pretty good partnerships with big pharma. So it's definitely one to pay attention to, I think. Arena Pharmaceuticals, ARNA is the ticker. Yeah, that's one. It's a stock. You can just buy it. You know what I mean? You can do your research. There's going to be plenty of information online, and yeah.
So we talked about Canopy Growth Corporation a little bit, and then Jimmy talked about Emblem, which is also a really big cannabis producer in Canada. Aphria Incorporated is another one. APH is the symbol, trades on the Toronto Stock Exchange. This is also a major player if you're looking for something safer. This is a good company to be in. I am kind of mixed on the risk angle. I've done really well by taking on a lot of risk in this space, so I'm not opposed to taking on risk even now, as there are companies like Canopy and Aphria that are huge corporations now. So if you're looking for something that has a little more risk but might have a higher reward potential, one company I really like right now is called MPX Bioceuticals. It used to be called Canadian Bioceutical Corporation. And the thing I like about this company is they're based in Canada, but they have exposure not only to the US market, but to the most lucrative markets in the US. So we think California and Colorado, everyone loves, they're huge markets, worth billions of dollars. But as an investor, there are better opportunities than California and Colorado. To give you an example, Massachusetts has a very strict limit on the licenses that they will give out. I believe it's 18 for the whole state. So if you are a company, a cannabis company operating in Massachusetts, and you have that license, you are one of 18 people that has that license, and you have a leg up. So MPX has exposure in Massachusetts. They also have exposure in Nevada, which is also turning out to be a really exciting market. And one of the things that I had written about in the past was people don't realize, when you look at the number of people that come to visit Nevada, specifically Vegas, and they spend a lot of money on alcohol, and they spend a lot of money on gambling, but now they spend a lot of money on weed, a lot more than anyone anticipated. So MPX has exposure in Nevada as well. They also have exposure in Arizona. So essentially this is a Canadian company that has enough capital to have a little exposure here and here and here in the United States, in states where it is legal, but in states also where it is not particularly as saturated as we see in California and Colorado. So I like that company very much. Another good thing about this, and some of you may have read this, a few weeks ago, I think it was a few weeks ago, the Toronto Stock Exchange said that they may no longer allow Canadian companies to list if they have operations in the U.S. These are cannabis companies. You know, I don't know why it's an issue, other than they say, well, technically speaking, federally, it's not legal. Cannabis is not legal in the United States, and I guess they don't want any hassle. There aren't a lot of companies on the TSX that do have exposure in the U.S. Afri is one of them, but MPX Bioceuticals is on the Canadian Securities Exchange, which is CSE, and the CSA doesn't give a fuck where you sell your weed. They just want their money, and so you know it's a good exchange for that company to be on. Those are some public companies. Okay, now I also work with private companies. I also invest in private companies, and members of my my newsletter, which is really more of an investment community, we invest in private companies as well, and we're able to do that because throughout my career, I've been able to make a lot of connections in the space, and I've been able to work with companies that are private that are raising money. Now, the thing you have to understand, if you want to invest in a private company, you have to be, 99% of the time, you have to be an accredited investor, which means you have to have a net worth of $1 million or more and make $200,000, I think it's $200,000, right? $200,000 a year for the last 3 years.
More than I make.
So I mean, it is difficult to get in those deals, but if you can, there are some really great companies. And one of the things I like about the private companies is we can see in the cannabis space, especially in the public market, or particularly in the public markets, there's a lot of hills and valleys, okay? So, you know, we had one time when, who was the White House spokesman, the first one? Sean
Spicer.
Sean Spicer came out and said, hey,
Spicy.
yeah, Spicy. He said, hey, we don't know what we're gonna do. We might actually come down on these cannabis companies. Well, if you were following any of the cannabis stocks that day, you watched them all lose 20% of their value because he said that. It did not affect the private companies at all. Even now, we continue to see peaks and valleys for any number of reasons. So you're a little more insulated in that when it comes to these private companies. Now, when I'm looking at investment opportunities in this space, we're beyond, okay, it's really important to understand this. We are beyond just investing in companies that grow weed. Like, that shit is over. Like, that's great that you can, you know, you're a grower, and if you're doing a great job, that's fantastic. But like, this industry is evolving rapidly. So when I'm looking at companies, I'm looking at everything. You know, I'm looking at tech companies, I'm looking at edibles companies. I'm looking at edibles companies that aren't making gummies. Okay, everybody makes gummies, and quite frankly, they taste like shit. And if I have another cookie that tastes like bong water, I'm gonna puke. You know, and I love edibles, okay? So we look for companies that are doing it right. So there's a company in the Bay Area called Defonce Chocolatier, and these, I was telling someone earlier today, so one of the problems with edibles is you never know what you're going to get. You get a bag of cookies, each cookie is different. You're going to have a different experience because they're not always dosed the same. So these guys at Defonce, they hired a mathematician to design the bar of the chocolate. So there's 10 pieces in the chocolate bar. Each piece has 10 milligrams and will give you the exact same experience every single time. And I tried it, and I've had many Defonce chocolate bars because I had to test them to make sure that they all were, you know, consistent, and they were. the chocolate's fantastic. It's direct trade chocolate. They know where their chocolate comes from. They source their cannabis from Hummingbird Medicinals, which is a fantastic grower, all organic. The experience is phenomenal. The taste is great. It almost, with the terpenes in it, it pairs with the chocolate the way they make it. So when you bite into it, it's an enjoyable experience. So Defonte Chocolate came around maybe not even 3 years ago, and they had this idea. So now they only sell in California. They have a very loyal following, and they went from being just this like kind of upscale chocolate bar maker, so now they're making these chocolate-covered blueberries, and they're opening up a retail shop in San Francisco, Beverly Hills, and Nevada, and they're going to have their own flour now. They're going to have their own vapes, everything, and they're an upscale company. You will not find, gummy worms in there. You're not going to find, a brownie in a silver package, with the rainbows on it. Like, I mean, let's face it. Like, I'm cool with do whatever makes you happy, but I'm an adult. I don't want to. Like, I'm not into eating candy anymore. I want to eat something that tastes good. So that's what Defonte is doing, and they've done really well. We got in that company, and I mean, the value of that company has quadrupled in the last year and a half. Everybody wants a piece of it. In fact, that the CEO went to New York early this year, met with 2 investors. Each investor gave him $2 million. They went home with $4 million. Everybody wants a piece of it. So that's the kind of company that we look at. There's another company called Kikoko. It's a tea company, infused tea. Tea is really hard because you can't just put cannabis in tea and it's not going to work because you can't just put it in water. You need some kind of oil or something. So I don't know how they did it, but the tea is fantastic. It's organic tea and it tastes really unbelievable and the experience is great. Again, it's an example of elevating the edibles market. They've actually done really well with the female demographic. So they actually have a tea that's supposed to enhance orgasms. They have a tea that's really good for women for PMS or menopause. So by focusing in on this demographic that is very important, has a lot of money and makes a lot of the purchasing decisions, this is very smart, and this is a company that I'm investing in. Technology side, there's a company called The Peak Beyond. The Peak Beyond makes, I don't know if I'm sure you've seen these before. You go in and you order a pizza or something, and it's it's a table, and you push I want a pepperoni pizza and a Coke, whatever. This is really fascinating because they'll have a jar of cannabis, and you take the jar and you set it down on the table. It will tell you everything you could possibly want to know, not even know about the cannabis, where it's grown, what it's going to do for you, what it's good for, the price, if there is any special going on, if there's anything that's similar to it. And this company also doesn't just work with cannabis companies, they work with everything. So they're really a tech company, but they got their start in the cannabis space. So my point is we're looking at companies that are no longer being defined by the stereotype of cannabis, or the negative stereotypes, let me say. We're looking at companies that are being run by very well-capitalized, very smart people. Defonte Chocolate is owned by one of the guys that created iTunes for Apple. 2 of the early investors were from Wired Magazine. These are really, really successful investors. And when I go to finance meetings now, I can assure you that every person there is a millionaire easily. They have a lot of connection to the tech space. They're young, and they're very enthusiastic. But if you show up to the table saying you want to, you have just a regular grow operation, or you're going to make infused, gummies. I hate using gummies over here, but just gummies. You're not doing anything different. If you're not elevating the conversation, you're not getting money, and it's not going to work. So, but if you can get in those companies, like we have, you're going to get in early. And we've been talking about, like Britt was saying before, once this happens on a federal level, I guarantee you, I don't think I'm going to be doing any of these presentations anymore, because all these companies are going to be bought up. And for good or for bad, that's how it's going to be. So if you're looking to invest in the cannabis space, you need to do it now, because I truly believe by 2021, cannabis will be legal on a federal level. And when that happens, your big banks are going to come in, your big pharma companies are going to come in, big tobacco, big ag, as much as they suck, they're going to come in and they're going to make shitty weed. And it sucks, but it is what it is. And they're going to buy out some of these companies, and we're in now, and when they get bought out, we're going to walk away with a lot of money. One thing I'd like to add to that before I pass this along is I've never really liked the idea of this commoditized market for cannabis. The idea of like you're gonna have like a Monsanto come in and basically take this beautiful plant that anybody here can grow, and it'll be fantastic, and they're gonna poison it. As an investor, I can look at this as an opportunity though, because there are companies that will make craft organic products. And just like we've seen in the organic food space, companies like Whole Foods or Hain Celestial, SunOpta, these are companies that took advantage of that. And so also look for some of those. If you want to look at a grower, make sure that grower is doing something special. There's a grower in Oregon called Hi-Fi Farms. They make they have organic craft cannabis that they sell. It's a phenomenal product. They're very community oriented, and they have a very loyal following because of what they do. They're never going to sell, a ton of weed, but it's okay because they get a premium on their product because it's that good. So just keep that in mind. I don't know how many people feel, maybe you don't care one way or the other, but if you do, if it does bother you that people are going to come in and kind of, take this plan and kind of ruin it in many ways, there will always be opportunities. You just got to kind of look for them. So,
which is kind of what happened with the craft beer market, where you see, InBev buying up like most of the craft beers, and I'm sure some of them kept the same recipes and did it, but they do cut corners, and then you may not be enjoying that beer as much, but everybody that worked for those companies, it's just all about money at that point. So if you're investing, I think you should be looking to make money, like in my opinion, or why would you do it? But I think you're going to see a similar thing with the craft marijuana market that you did see with craft beer, where they do get bought up, and if you pick a couple of winners, it's pretty lucrative.
I also want to add too, in terms of dispensaries, I don't really invest in many of those because I haven't really seen ones that have decent margins, but there are some. In terms of dispensaries, there are two that I would invest in. One would be the types of dispensaries that we see now that look like Apple stores. Okay, there will always be a place for a lot of the dispensaries that we see now that kind of look like dorm rooms, and that's fine, but they're not going to make as much money. Also, community-oriented ones. There's a really great dispensary in Oakland called Magnolia, and they're very community-oriented. They do classes. They teach newbies, about vaping and how to roll a joint, stuff like that. So they're really paying attention to the new folks that are coming in. There are a lot of them, and they need to be. We need to hold their hand, and so dispensaries that do that are really sowing the seeds of a new world of customers. And these guys also, they do great stuff, man. Like if you have cancer, I think it's cancer, HIV, and maybe Crohn's is the other one. They give you a huge discount on your cannabis. They do like community events and they do a food bank. So they're not really a dispensary. They are. You go there to buy your weed, but it's a community. It's a place for like-minded people to get together and feel like they're a part of something. While there will be a commoditization of these dispensaries too, you will have these little ones, and if they operate in that fashion, they will be profitable.
Yeah, it's one of the beauties of a consumer-driven market, in my opinion, is that you can have, giant, really generic companies that can make you a lot of money on owning their stock over time, and you can also have, really amazing local businesses that provide a, very high-quality product. For instance, if you look at the Constellation Brands example, how many people here drink Bud Light? probably none of you, right? Because it's kind of like not very good beer. Yeah, Anheuser-Busch is a giant company. If you're going to just buy stock and own it for a long time, it's a great choice. If you're looking to, start a business, enter a business, invest in a business, you can certainly think locally and find like a local, brewer that's making something that's high quality that local people like. And it's one of the beauties of a consumer market. Perhaps that chocolate edibles company that Jeff was talking about, they can explode onto the scene and become major companies. We've seen it. You look at burgers, right? Shake Shack was nothing 5 years ago as a stand in Central Park. Now it's like a massive company. The beauty of the consumer-driven market is that people's whims, they can change on a dime. Something can explode, and to me, these are the things to watch for. Watch your local market. See who's thinking about baking stuff with pot in it, or brewing something with pot in it. It's like these things can work on a couple different levels, and it's going to be really fun to see it play out, because you love seeing a startup, come along, have a really great product that like catches fire, and there will be an opportunity for that. Whether Jeff has the one, he might. It sounds like you do. He definitely does.
And demand more.
It can certainly happen. It can certainly happen.
As not just as an investor, but as consumers, demand more. You can. I'm sick and tired of cannabis consumers being kind of considered like we're the last on the last in line. We'll just get whatever they can give us. Fuck that. Demand more. Devontae exists because people demand more. That tea company, Cococo, they exist because people demand more. If you want high quality cannabis, if you want something clean, if you want a product that you think really works with your lifestyle, demand it, because the market will give you what you want, but you have to let the market know that that's what you want.
So don't buy the Bud Light. Buy the craft beer.
So I don't want to. If there are any questions, I'd like to leave some time for that. So are there any questions at all?
Is DMX on yet? No, not.
I invited
Questions for you.
I invited Lil Dicky to come to talk about. He was going to make a money, he could save that money, but no. All right. No? Yeah, please.
When you talk about investing in the private companies, do you mean like the startup companies investing in them, or you're just going to give them money so that they can expand, right?
I'm sorry, if I can invest in, and say that again?
How would you invest in a private company to give them money to expand their business?
Okay. So the question is, how can you invest in some of these private companies? There's two things you have to understand. First, you do have to be an accredited investor, as I mentioned. Oftentimes, when these companies raise money, there's kind of like this network of investors. So, and that's one of the things that I've done with my service, is that I'm connected to these different companies and the people that raise this money. So I find them and then I present them to my community. And there are other people that do that, but I am one. You could become a member of Green Chip Stocks, and you'll learn all about it. But that's essentially how it works. And it's it is a little frustrating, because again, it kind of goes against this idea of the democratization of money. Why can't maybe I don't have $1 million. Maybe I have $5,000 I want to invest. Why can't I invest in a private company? Well, the SEC thinks you're too stupid and you're going to get burned. Meanwhile, banks can rip you off, no problem. You can invest in those, no big deal. But I'll get off that soapbox. With the invention of equity crowdfunding, we will see more of that, but right now I'd stay far away from the equity crowdfunding models because they're really, really shady. And I've seen a few cannabis companies launch on there, and they were just shit companies, and they were just taking money and leaving. So to answer your question, you really have to know somebody or be a part of a network. And if you'd like to talk afterward, I can give you my email, and you're more than welcome to. I can send you some information about that. That's pretty much how it works. Any other questions? Really? Y'all don't want to make some money?
Since you said that investing in Canadian companies is good, since that market's about to open up. California's about to open up. What should we keep an eye on more in the state, since that's going to happen to you?
What should we keep in? What was the last part?
Which company should we keep an eye on in California, since that's about to open up?
Okay.
First.
So the question was, which companies in California should we keep an eye on as the California market is going to open up, as you know, January 1st, depending upon what part of California you live in. So one thing we talk about Canada a lot, and the fact that it is going to be legal on July 1st is the difference is in California, the state of California says you can smoke weed, it's cool, don't worry about it. Federal government says no, you can't. Now, I don't believe for one second that there's going to be any federal crackdown at all. I don't see it happening. No one can win from that. The Trump administration, say what you want about Trump, but the fact is, he has nothing to gain from a federal crackdown, which is why I believe that he's kept Jeff Sessions on a leash. Now, in terms of if you're not concerned about that potential risk, which I am not, because like I said, I don't really think it's that much of a risk. If you're looking in California, public companies with exposure in California, Jimmy, can you think of any?
Yeah, there's a company called TerraTech. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Same, you said it, but I.
Okay.
Okay.
Is it Kiva or is it TerraTech?
Kiva may be one of their brands, I think. But TerraTech is pretty decent, and they also have exposure in the Nevada market as well.
But the thing I like about them is they burn a lot of cash, and they have some financial problems. They're doing well. They're doing a lot better than they were last year, but they're still burning through a lot of cash.
But I do think when financial results for them come out after a while in Vegas, and I don't know if you guys heard this, but when they legalized recreational cannabis in Las Vegas, the governor declared a state of emergency because they ran out of weed. A state of emergency, we need more weed because everybody bought it all up. I don't see that trend going anywhere. It's Vegas, like why not? But for example, TerraTech is a company with exposure in California dispensaries and Nevada. And when I look at companies, I would like more exposure in different places just in case,
What's the symbol for TerraTech?
I don't have it off the top of my head.
I want to say it's TRTC, but if you look up TerraTech, I think they're going for about 20 cents right now, so it's still a penny stock.
Yeah, I wouldn't risk your life on it, but if you're taking a chance on, if you want a California or Nevada stock, that's something worth looking at. And again, the U.S. stocks are risky, and I'm kind of split on it as well. And I stick almost entirely to Canada. But there are other markets opening up in the United States that I think could be very positive, like the Florida. I like the Florida medical market because everybody in Florida is old and sick. Have you guys been to Florida? So there is a company called Liberty Health Sciences that is teamed up with Aphria, who is a solid Canadian company. So they are using Aphria's intellectual property to expand into the Florida market. The name is Liberty Health Sciences, and the ticker for that is LHS. It's on the Canadian Stock Exchange.
I like Liberty too. I think it's an up-and-comer. It's a first mover advantage in Florida for sure.
Yeah, and in Florida it's cool too because there's only 7 licenses that go out, and they have one of them. So, for instance, in Canada, there is so many licenses out that you have maybe 1 license for every 800,000 people. Where in Florida at the medical market, you have 1 license for 3 million people. So there's definitely potential there. And it's early enough where they're not opening up the licenses yet. So they do that first mover advantage. They have a solid company like Aphria coming in there and helping them get everything started because that's a hard business. You can't just set up a factory and expect it to go well. There's entire infrastructures in place. So I like their, it's again risky, but Florida's a big market that has not been tapped yet. So give Liberty Health Sciences a look if you're looking for a bit of risk, but very high reward possibility.
Yeah, I think they're still relatively cheap too. I think they're trading for about 80 cents. I'd say it's probably worth about $1, so it's 20% upside. You had a question, dude in the red shirt?
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you, so you remember 5 years ago in 2012 when Colorado and Washington became legal?
I'm sorry, say that again?
You remember when 5 years ago when Colorado and Washington became legal?
Uh-huh.
So I told my dad to invest because like I'm broke, but he has cash, and I told him you should invest in penny stocks because I read online that there was like legal companies that are traded privately. I think you were talking about.
Uh-huh.
And I was going to ask you, what is some advice that you guys would say for like someone like my dad, where like he doesn't know that much about the cannabis market, but he can like throw skin in the game to like somewhere that could do it like professionally.
I can take this one if you want.
Okay, repeat the question too.
So the question, well, can you repeat the question and I'll answer it?
He wanted to know how you can invest.
The question was, what advice would you give someone who's just starting out and wants to get some skin in the game?
And is fairly conservative, probably too.
Is he fairly?
Oh yeah. So I wanted to talk about my dad. After I visited Canopy, and my dad has been an investor, and he taught me how to invest when I was a kid. So I came home, I was like, Dad, I would throw some money in this weed company, man. And he was like, what? No, I'm not gonna do that at all. And I just had a conversation the other day, and because he had seen, I mean, it's up like 800% since I had bought it myself. So I kind of teased him about it once or twice through the years, and he was just like, God damn it, what? All right, maybe you were right. And he actually secretly bought some a year or two ago. He's like, so I was like, I told you to invest. He's like, yeah, no, I did last year. Thanks. I was like, okay, toss some in the inheritance.
So what advice would you give him then?
I think that's a really interesting situation that's happening with older people especially. It is becoming very, very acceptable. And I know I have a ton of readers that I've talked to. I was talking to a reader that was 90 years old the other day, and he was just pretty much telling me like, thanks, I was super concerned about this. It's something I never would have done. I've never smoked pot in my life. But he had read a couple of articles and a couple of newsletters, and he was just like, you know, I put in a couple $1,000s, and like now, like I'm very comfortable. I still don't smoke weed, but thanks for the money. So yeah, I'd make the money argument for the older folks that maybe, you know, aren't into smoking weed, but they can see what has happened. So it's pretty easy sell.
If he's looking also to get in that space, treat it like anything else. I mean, again, like I'm very outspoken about this. I don't like the idea of cannabis being treated differently than any other industry, particularly when it comes to taxation. But in terms of an investment, it's like any other investment. Become an expert in what you invest in. That's a really weird thing too for me, is I see people spend more time trying to pick out a TV than they do picking out a stock to invest in. Become an expert. If you say you want to find 10 stocks, you find 10 stocks that are cannabis stocks. Learn everything you can about those stocks. Don't just read the front page and what they do. Like, go to the investors relations section. See how much money they've made over the past few years. See how much money they're spending. See how much money they're investing. See how many connections they have. Again, it's really about, and I think this is true for anything, any investment. I don't think investing is not rocket science. The fact that I've been able to do this for over 20 years now is insane. I barely graduated high school. Okay, it's really common sense. Just know as much as you can about the company you're going to invest in. If there's a red flag, then that's a red flag. You know, maybe I shouldn't invest in this. In the cannabis space, the only thing I would say is different, and this again really depends upon your risk tolerance, is if you are concerned that the federal government will crack down on states that legalize, then you might want to stay clear of the U.S. companies. But again, you know, I really believe the chances of that happening are nil. So I hope that answers your question.
I want to add actually a little bit to your question. Pay attention to what the valuation of the company is that you're looking at buying, right? Look at what the market says it's worth. Constellation is a $12 billion company right now, right? I'm not sure, I can't tell you their revenues offhand. They're valued at 23 times their earning. Maybe a little expensive. It's a $12 billion company. How much revenue are they going to add by selling cannabis-infused beers, for instance, right? $1 billion, that's a shitload of beer to sell, right? $1 billion. So the upside there, it may not be huge. Constellation's a very established company. They're going to be around. They're going to be able to grow sales. They can raise prices. They're going to raise their dividend. It's going to be a solid investment, for a while. If you're looking at, some of the smaller ones, really pay attention to what the market says they're worth, because they'll get to, levels that don't make sense. And that's really in my opinion, one of the best ways to look at them and really sort of define your risk. It's, when you're talking about, a new sector sort of emerging into people's consciousness as a viable investment, right? Like Jimmy said, a couple of years ago, a 90-year-old guy's not going to invest in weed at all. He's going to think you're crazy. Your dad's like, you're nuts. Why would you do that? A couple of years later, the 90-year-old guy's like, yeah, I would actually invest in weed. The metaphor is like when your taxi driver starts giving you stock tips, that's time to sell. You don't want to be in when everybody is buying a stock. Pay attention to that type of dynamic, because it really is sort of a true thing. You can never exactly say when that happens. I personally still think that the marijuana investing is emerging into people's consciousness. I think there's a ways to go. I don't think you're at the point where everybody and his brother is buying weed stocks. I think it's still emerging. I think the Canadian vote's going to be a big milestone. I would think that you would want to do it now, do it before that vote, because that's going to be. It's only going to get more and more press as we approach that, right? It's going to get more attention in the news. It's going to get more news articles written. They're going to talk about it on CNBC more. It's going to go and go until that vote happens, and then it's probably going to go after that as they declare a state of emergency because they don't have enough weed or they don't know what to do. So it's like, I really think, in terms of some of the smaller companies, the sooner the better is probably the right way to go.
Yeah, the best time was yesterday. The second best time
is right now, right? If you wait another month and stocks go up another 20%, or you wait another 3 months and they go up 30%, every time stocks go up in value, people see them as being more attractive because hey, everyone's buying them. But the fact is, as they go up in value, they're becoming less attractive because they're getting too expensive.
So we have to wrap it up now, but we're going to hang out afterwards. If you have any other questions, feel free to come up and talk to us. Thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Greg.